Good evening, all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight, we are venturing into one of the most cursed regions in America, where ancient mountains hide horrors that predate civilization itself. 10 souls ventured into these forgotten hollows seeking solitude, adventure, or answers. What they found instead were things that should have remained buried in the darkness between the trees. From whistling entities that mimic the voices of the dead to staircases that lead nowhere but oblivion, these are not legends passed down through generations. These are documented encounters with the unexplainable, the unnatural, and the unforgiving wilderness of Appalachia. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now let us step into the shadows of the Appalachian deep woods, where civilization ends and terror begins. I had just turned 28 that October, and the cabin rental outside Cherokee seemed like the perfect escape after my divorce finalized 3 weeks earlier. My ex-wife had gotten the house, the dog, and most of our friends in the settlement. What I got was a stack of papers, an empty apartment in Asheville, and the overwhelming need to be anywhere else for a while. The isolation did not bother me much when I booked the place online. 3 miles up a gravel logging road surrounded by nothing but hickory trees and the constant whisper of wind through the ridges. The photos showed a modest single-room cabin with a wood stove, a covered porch, and windows facing dense forest that stretched for miles in every direction. The rental owner, a woman named Carol who lived down in the valley, had excellent reviews. $400 for the week seemed like a steal compared to what I had been paying for half of a mortgage. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October, when the leaves were just starting to turn that deep amber color that makes the Smoky Mountains look like they are on fire. The drive up the logging road took 20 minutes of careful navigation around potholes and fallen branches. My Honda Civic was not built for terrain like this, but I managed to reach the clearing where the cabin sat at the end of the track. The structure looked exactly like the photos, maybe a bit more weathered up close. White paint peeling in long strips, the porch sagging slightly on the left side, but the roof looked solid and the stone chimney stood straight. I parked next to a rusted burn barrel and hauled my duffel bag and grocery bags inside. The interior was clean enough. One large room with a double bed in the corner, a small kitchenette with a propane stove, a wood-burning stove in the center with a rocking chair positioned nearby, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. The windows had thick curtains that looked handmade, probably decades old, and the floorboards creaked with every step. I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking my supplies, getting the wood stove going since the temperature was already dropping into the 40s, and making myself a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers. There was no cell service up here, which Carol had warned me about in her confirmation email. She had left a CB radio on the kitchen counter with a note that said to use channel 14 in case of emergencies. The nearest neighbor was apparently Old Man Hendricks, who lived about 2 miles east, but Carol mentioned he kept to himself mostly. That first night passed without incident. I sat on the porch until well after dark, drinking cheap whiskey and watching the stars emerge between the branches. The forest was loud with the usual night sounds: crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, branches scraping against each other in the wind. I fell asleep around 11 and slept straight through until morning, the kind of deep sleep I had not experienced in months. Friday was equally uneventful. I spent the day hiking the old logging trails, taking photographs of the fall colors, trying to clear my head of all the anger and disappointment that had built up during the divorce proceedings. By the time I returned to the cabin that evening, I was exhausted in the best way possible. I made dinner, read for a while by the light of a kerosene lantern since the cabin only had minimal solar-powered lighting, and went to bed early. It was Friday night when things started to feel wrong. I woke up around 10:45 p.m. to the sound of whistling coming from somewhere outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees in a particular way, creating that hollow tone that sometimes happens in the mountains. But as I lay there listening, I realized the sound was too deliberate, too structured to be wind. It was a tune, an actual melody that I almost recognized, something old, like a folk song my grandmother might have hummed when I was a kid. The whistling was coming from the direction of the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the cabin. I sat up in bed, every muscle in my body suddenly tense, and listened more carefully. The tune continued for about 2 minutes, then stopped abruptly. I waited in the darkness but heard nothing else. After 10 minutes of silence, I convinced myself it had been a hiker passing through, maybe someone camping nearby who did not realize how far sound carried at night. I eventually fell back asleep, though it took longer than I would have liked. Saturday was when I should have left. I woke up tired, on edge for reasons I could not quite articulate. The day itself was fine. I drove into Cherokee, grabbed lunch at a diner, walked around the town for a few hours just to be around other people. But when I returned to the cabin that afternoon, I found myself dreading the approaching nightfall. I made dinner early, around 6 p.m., and spent the remaining daylight reinforcing my rationalization that the whistling had been nothing. Just a hiker, just the wind, just my imagination working overtime because I was alone in an unfamiliar place during a stressful period of my life. By 9:00 p.m., I had convinced myself enough to relax slightly. I sat in the rocking chair near the wood stove, reading a paperback thriller I had brought from home, trying to focus on someone else's fictional problems instead of my real ones. The whistling started again at 10:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my watch the moment I heard it. The same tune as the night before, clear and deliberate, coming from the tree line. But this time it did not stay in one place. Over the next 20 minutes, the whistling moved. It started on the east side of the cabin, then slowly circled around to the north, then to the west. The sound maintained the same distance, always about 50 yards out. Always just at the edge of where the forest became truly dense. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, listening to it make this methodical circuit around my temporary home. When the whistling reached the front of the cabin and stopped directly in line with the porch steps, my hands started shaking. The tune played through one complete cycle, then stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I moved to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see outside. The porch was empty. The clearing around the cabin was visible in the moonlight. Nothing but grass and the dirt path leading to where my car was parked. The tree line was a wall of shadow beyond the reach of the moon. I stared at that darkness for 5 full minutes, looking for any movement, any shape that did not belong. Nothing. I was about to let the curtain fall back when I heard my name. Not shouted, not whispered, but spoken at a normal conversational volume. Sean. Just once, in a voice that sounded exactly like my ex-wife. The same inflection, the same slight southern accent, the way she always said my name when she was annoyed with me. My blood went cold. I backed away from the window, my mind racing through impossible explanations. She did not know where I was. She did not care where I was. This could not be her, but that voice was perfect, identical, down to the particular way she pronounced the vowel. Then another voice joined in. Sean. This one was my mother, who lived 4 states away in Ohio. Then another, my brother. Then my college roommate. Then people I had not spoken to in years. All of them calling my name from different directions, different distances, overlapping and echoing through the trees. The voices circled the cabin just like the whistling had, a chorus of familiar sounds coming from mouths that could not possibly be out there in the darkness. I ran to the door and checked the deadbolt. It was locked, but the lock was old, and the door frame was soft wood that had seen decades of moisture and rot. If something wanted in, this would not stop it for long. I dragged the kitchenette table across the floor and wedged it against the door. Then I grabbed the CB radio and switched it to channel 14. Hello? This is the cabin on Raven Ridge Road. I need help. There's someone outside. Multiple people. I do not know what they want. My voice sounded high and thin, nothing like the calm tone I was trying to project. Static came back through the speaker, then a voice I did not recognize. Copy that, Raven Ridge. What is your emergency? I started to explain but stopped when I heard the scratching. It started at the back wall near the bathroom. Long, dragging sounds like fingernails on wood siding, but deeper, harder. More like claws or metal tools scraping systematically across the surface. The scratching moved along the wall, testing the windows, probing the gaps between the boards. I watched in horror as the curtains trembled slightly from the vibration. They are trying to get in, I said into the radio. I do not know who they are. Please send someone. The voice on the other end responded, but the words were drowned out by static that suddenly filled the channel. Through the static, I heard voices. The same voices that had been calling my name outside, now coming through the radio speaker. My ex-wife, my mother, my brother, all talking at once, their words overlapping into nonsense. I threw the radio across the room, and it hit the wall with a crack, going silent. The scratching continued, methodical and patient, testing every surface. I moved to the center of the room, as far from the walls as I could get, and that was when I saw the shadows. They moved past the windows, tall shapes that did not quite look human. The proportions were wrong, arms too long, heads tilted at angles that necks should not bend. They moved with a strange, jerking gait, like stop-motion animation, each movement slightly disconnected from the last. I do not know how long I stood there in the center of that room, turning slowly to watch the shadows circle the cabin. It felt like hours. My legs ached from standing rigid, my jaw hurt from clenching my teeth, my eyes burned from refusing to blink. The scratching eventually stopped. The shadows stopped moving. The voices fell silent. And then, just before dawn, everything simply ended. The forest sounds returned. The crickets, the wind, the normal creaks and groans of an old building settling. When the first light of sunrise started to filter through the curtains, I finally moved. I approached the windows carefully and looked outside. The clearing was empty. The tree line looked exactly as it had during the day, just trees and undergrowth and fallen leaves. But when I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, I saw the evidence that I had not imagined it. The windows were covered in handprints, dozens of them pressed against the glass from outside. But the prints were wrong. The fingers were too long, each one stretching at least 6 inches, maybe more. The palms were narrow, the thumbs positioned too far down. I walked around the cabin in the growing daylight and found footprints in the soft dirt near the foundation. Barefoot prints, but massive, with toes that spread unnaturally wide, almost prehensile. They circled the entire structure, overlapping in places where whatever made them had stopped to examine something more closely. I did not wait to investigate further. I threw my belongings into my duffel bag in less than 10 minutes, loaded everything into my car, and drove down that logging road faster than was safe. I did not stop until I reached Cherokee. I went straight to the sheriff's office and told them everything. The deputy who took my report was a man in his 50s with a weathered face and tired eyes. He listened without interrupting, writing notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me for a long moment. "You followed the rule," he finally said. I asked him what he meant. "Carol tells all her renters, 'Do not answer if you hear whistling at night.' She told you that, right?" I shook my head. I had never received any such warning, not in the listing, not in her emails, not in the note she left about the CB radio. The deputy frowned and made another note. "Well, you followed it anyway. That is why you are here." He did not explain further, just filed the report and told me to have a safe drive home. I never went back to those mountains. I have tried to research what happened, searching for similar stories online, digging through local folklore and historical records. I found some references to the Whistlers in old Appalachian legends, entities that mimic voices to lure people out of their homes at night. But nothing concrete, nothing that explained what they really are or what they want. I still hear that whistling sometimes in my dreams, that old folk tune I almost recognize. And every time I do, I wake up convinced that something is standing outside my apartment window, 3 stories up, calling my name in voices I should know. I have changed apartments twice since that trip. It does not help. The whistling always finds me eventually. I was cataloging plant species for my graduate thesis that June, working deep in the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky. At 25, I had hiked these mountains dozens of times over the previous 3 years, always alone, always confident in my navigation skills and wilderness training. My research focused on rare fern species that only grew in specific microclimates within the forest, which meant venturing far off established trails and spending days at a time camping in isolated areas. My thesis advisor had approved a 2-week solo expedition to document several promising sites that I had identified during preliminary surveys the previous summer. I had all the necessary permits, emergency protocols in place, and enough experience to feel comfortable with the solitude. I started the expedition on a Monday morning in mid-June, hiking 8 miles from the nearest trail marker to establish my base camp near a creek bed that showed promising characteristics for the fern species I was studying. The weather was perfect. Temperatures in the mid-70s, clear skies, just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes manageable. I set up my tent in a small clearing surrounded by old-growth oak and maple trees, established my equipment cache on a bear hang, and spent the rest of the day organizing my research materials. My gear included a high-end GPS unit, a satellite phone for emergencies, field notebooks, collection supplies, and enough freeze-dried food to last 3 weeks if necessary. Everything was going exactly according to plan. The first 3 days were productive and uneventful. I cataloged 2 potential sites, collected samples, took measurements and photographs, and felt confident that I was gathering solid data for my thesis. The isolation was peaceful rather than unsettling. I had always preferred working alone in the field, finding that the solitude helped me focus and notice details that I might miss with a partner chattering away. The forest was alive with normal sounds during the day. Birds calling, squirrels rustling through the canopy, the creek burbling over rocks. At night, I would fall asleep to the sound of insects and the occasional distant call of an owl. It was exactly the kind of research experience I had hoped for when I started graduate school. On the 4th day, I decided to follow the creek bed north to investigate a small tributary that appeared on my topographical map. The area looked promising based on elevation and moisture indicators, and I wanted to survey it before moving my base camp later in the week. I packed a day bag with water, snacks, my GPS, collection supplies, and my field notebook. The hike started around 8:03 a.m. under partly cloudy skies. The creek bed was easy to follow, the terrain relatively flat, and I made good progress through the morning. Around 11:30, I noticed the temperature dropping, not gradually but suddenly, like someone had opened a refrigerator door. Within 5 minutes, my breath was visible in the air despite the fact that it had been nearly 70 degrees just moments before. The sky was still clear, the sun still bright, but the air felt like late autumn rather than early summer. I stopped to put on my fleece jacket, confused by the sudden change but not yet alarmed. Microclimates in mountain valleys could create temperature variations, though nothing this dramatic in my experience. I continued following the creek for another 10 minutes until I reached a small clearing surrounded by dense undergrowth. And that was when I saw the staircase. It stood in the exact center of the clearing, about 20 feet from where I had emerged from the tree line. A wooden staircase, ornate and completely out of place, rising 12 feet into the air and leading to nothing. Victorian-style construction with carved banisters, decorative newel posts at the bottom, and a carpet runner going up the center of the steps. The carpet was burgundy with a floral pattern, and it looked impossibly clean. No dirt, no leaves, No signs of weather damage despite obviously being exposed to the elements. I stood at the edge of the clearing and stared at this impossible object for several minutes, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. There was no building, no foundation, no structure of any kind. Just this staircase standing alone in the middle of a forest clearing like a stage prop that someone had forgotten to remove. I walked around it slowly, examining it from all angles. The wood looked old, but well maintained. The craftsmanship excellent. The whole thing sturdy and solid rather than a rotting relic. I reached out and touched one of the banisters. The wood was smooth and cool under my fingers, real and tangible. This was not a hallucination. I pulled out my GPS unit to mark the coordinates, but the screen was showing impossible numbers. The latitude and longitude were fluctuating wildly, jumping between values that would have placed me everywhere from Canada to Mexico. As I stood there trying to make sense of the malfunctioning GPS, I felt something I had never experienced before in all my years of fieldwork. A physical pull, like a rope tied around my chest, urging me toward the staircase. Not a gentle suggestion, but an actual force. A compulsion that made my legs want to move without my permission. I wanted to climb those stairs. I needed to climb them. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to walk over there, put my foot on the first step, and see where they led. The rational part of my mind understood that this made no sense, that there was nowhere for the stairs to lead except 12 feet into empty air. But the compulsion did not care about logic. It cared about getting me to climb. I forced myself to sit down in the grass at the edge of the clearing, as far from the staircase as I could get while still keeping it in sight. I wrapped my arms around my knees and physically held myself, in place, fighting against the pull. 20 minutes passed this way. My entire body was tense with the effort of staying still, sweat running down my back despite the cold air, my breathing rapid and shallow. The compulsion was not weakening. If anything, it was getting stronger, more insistent, a physical sensation like hooks in my flesh, trying to drag me forward. I kept my eyes locked on the staircase, and that was when I heard the footsteps. Someone was climbing the stairs. I could hear boots on wood, the creak of old timber under weight, the soft whisper of fabric brushing against the banister. But I saw no one. The staircase was empty, yet the sounds continued. Step after step, slowly ascending, taking time on each tread. Then I heard her voice, my grandmother, who had died 10 years earlier, calling my name from the top of the stairs. "Amelia, sweetie, come up here. I've been waiting for you." The voice was perfect. The exact tone, the pet name she had always used, the slight rasp from decades of smoking that had eventually killed her. I started crying without realizing it, tears streaming down my face while I dug my fingers into the grass to keep myself anchored. "Please, Amelia, do not make me wait any longer. Just come up and see me. I have missed you so much." The voice was pleading now, hurt and confused. Every fiber of my being wanted to go to her, wanted to climb those stairs and see my grandmother one more time. But I knew it was wrong. I knew that whatever was up there using her voice was not her. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the voice, calling from the top of the stairs, and my own ragged breathing. I tried to stand up, thinking I would run, but my legs would not obey. I managed to get to my feet, but when I tried to walk away from the clearing, my body turned toward the staircase instead. I took 3 steps forward before I realized what was happening and forced myself to stop. I was being pulled in. The compulsion was winning. I dropped back to my knees and pulled out my satellite phone with shaking hands. It took 3 tries to power it on, and when the screen finally lit up, I had no signal. Impossible. These phones were designed to work anywhere with a view of the sky, but the signal indicator showed nothing. I do not know how long I knelt there in that clearing, fighting against the pull of the staircase, while my grandmother's voice continued calling my name. Time felt strange, elastic, like hours were passing in minutes, or minutes were stretching into hours. The sun did not seem to move in the sky. The temperature stayed the same. Nothing changed except the growing desperation in my grandmother's voice and the weakening of my resistance. I was losing. I could feel it. Soon I would stand up, walk to those stairs, and climb, and whatever was waiting at the top would have me. In a moment of clarity, I remembered something my field survival instructor had taught us during graduate training. If you are ever completely lost, close your eyes and walk backwards. It resets your spatial orientation and can break directional fixation. I had no idea if it would work for whatever this situation was, but I had no other options. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and started walking backwards. I counted each step out loud to focus my mind. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pull grew stronger immediately, like elastic bands stretching to their limit. My grandmother's voice rose to a scream. Amelia, no, do not leave me. Please do not leave me here alone again. I kept walking backwards, counting, tears streaming down my face. 21, 22, 23. The voice was fading now, growing distant. The pull was weakening. 47, 48, 49. I stumbled over something and fell backwards, landing hard on the ground. When I opened my eyes, I was at least 200 yards from the clearing. I could see the top of the staircase above the undergrowth, but it looked different from this distance. Smaller, less substantial, like it was fading. My GPS unit was suddenly working again, showing my correct coordinates. The satellite phone showed full signal. I called the park ranger station with shaking hands and spoke to a ranger named Matthews, who listened to my stammering explanation without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. "You closed your eyes and walked backwards?" he asked. I confirmed that I had. "Good. Stay where you are. I will be there in 3 hours." He refused to discuss it further over the phone, just confirmed my coordinates, and told me to wait. When he arrived 3.5 hours later with another ranger, we hiked back to the clearing together. The staircase was gone. There was just an impression in the leaves and grass where something rectangular had been, and the faint smell of old wood and dust. Ranger Matthews took photographs, measured the impression, and made detailed notes. He seemed unsurprised by all of it. On the hike back to the trailhead, he finally explained. The staircases had been documented in national forests across Appalachia since the 1950s, maybe longer. They appeared randomly, stayed for hours or days, then vanished. 14 people had climbed them over the years and never been seen again. Not a trace, not a body, nothing. Search parties with dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging, all came up empty. The official policy was to note the location, document what was found, and keep it out of public records. "You did exactly right," he told me. "The moment you felt that pull, you should have run, but walking backwards was smart. That is the first time I have heard of someone breaking the compulsion that way." I asked him what he thought they were. He looked at me with tired eyes that had seen too much. Honestly, I do not want to know. I never went back to finish my thesis research in that forest. I transferred my project to a different location, graduated 6 months late, and now work in botanical gardens where the most dangerous thing I encounter is poison ivy. But sometimes, when I'm working alone in the greenhouse late at night, I see something in my peripheral vision. A staircase that should not be there, standing in the corner where we keep the ferns. When I turn to look directly at it, there is nothing, just shadows and shelving units. But I know what I saw. And I know that someday, if I am not careful, I'm going to turn around and it will still be there when I look directly at it. And I will have to decide whether to climb. I had inherited my grandfather's hunting cabin in the Smoky Mountains when he passed away in early September. The property sat tucked in a hollow about 5 miles from any neighbor, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that required 4-wheel drive during wet weather. At 34, I had visited the cabin maybe a dozen times as a kid, always during family gatherings, but I'd not been back since my teenage years. The inheritance was unexpected. My grandfather and I had not been particularly close in his final years, our relationship strained by family drama that I will not get into. But his will specifically left the cabin to me, along with the surrounding 40 acres, and I decided to spend my 2-week vacation from my construction job in Knoxville fixing the place up. Maybe I would use it for hunting season. Maybe I would just have a retreat from the noise and stress of the city. Either way, it was mine now, and it needed work. I arrived on a Monday afternoon in late September, the leaves just starting to show their autumn colors. The cabin looked worse than I remembered. The roof had multiple leaks that had stained the ceiling inside. The front porch sagged dangerously on the left side where the support posts had rotted through, and the windows were so grimy that barely any light penetrated. But the stone foundation was solid, the walls were structurally sound, and the fireplace still drew properly when I tested it. I had brought enough supplies for 2 weeks: a portable generator for power, hand tools, replacement lumber, roofing materials, and enough food to avoid having to make trips back to town. The first 3 days I spent on basic repairs, patching the roof, replacing the worst of the porch boards, scrubbing decades of grime off the windows. The work was satisfying in a way my normal construction jobs were not. This was mine. Every improvement I made added value to something I owned, rather than padding someone else's investment portfolio. On Wednesday evening, while clearing out some boxes of my grandfather's belongings from a storage closet, I found his old hunting journals. He had kept detailed records going back to the 1960s. Dates, times, weather conditions, what he had seen or shot, notes about animal behavior and forest observations. I spent an hour flipping through them, fascinated by the meticulous documentation. Most entries were mundane, exactly what you would expect from a dedicated hunter. But as I worked backward through the years, I found an entry from October 1987 that made me stop. The handwriting was shaky, less controlled than the other entries, and the text was brief. The watcher came again last night, 2 a.m. like always. I've tried everything. Nothing stops him. I do not know what he wants, but I'm getting too old for this. Margaret says I should burn the place down and start over somewhere else. I sat on the dusty floor of the storage closet reading that entry 3 times, trying to make sense of it. My grandmother Margaret had died in 1989, so this was written at least 2 years before that. I flipped through more journals, looking for other references to the Watcher, and found half a dozen scattered across different years. Always brief, always disturbed in tone, always mentioning 2 a.m. The earliest reference I could find was from 1983. Heard him again last night. Heavy boots on the porch, tried the door for 15 minutes. I know he is not real, but the door handle still moves. I closed the journals feeling uneasy in a way I could not quite articulate. My grandfather had never mentioned anything like this during family visits. He had always seemed practical, grounded, not the type to believe in ghosts or write cryptic warnings in his journals. That night, I made dinner, read for a while by lantern light since I was trying to conserve generator fuel, and went to bed around 10:30 p.m. The cabin was silent except for the usual settling sounds of an old building and the wind moving through the trees outside. I fell asleep easily, exhausted from 3 days of physical labor. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Heavy boots, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth across the wooden boards. I lay in bed completely still, listening, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. I heard the front door handle turn slowly, metal scraping against metal. The deadbolt held. There was a long pause, then the footsteps resumed, moving to the side of the cabin toward the windows. I forced myself to get up and look outside, but I could see nothing in the darkness. No flashlight, no moon that night, just solid black beyond the glass. The footsteps eventually faded, and I did not hear them again until I checked my watch. It was 2:47 a.m. I convinced myself in the morning that it had been an animal. A bear, maybe, or a large deer. The porch and door handle sounds were probably just the building settling and my imagination filling in the rest. I had been reading my grandfather's paranoid journal entries right before bed, which had obviously influenced my interpretation of normal night sounds. I spent Thursday working on interior repairs, trying not to think about the previous night. But when 2 a.m. rolled around on Friday morning, the footsteps came again. Same pattern, same heavy boots, same deliberate pacing. I grabbed my flashlight this time and went to the window, shining the light out onto the porch. The beam illuminated empty boards. The footsteps continued, unaffected by the light, moving right past where I was standing on the other side of the glass. I watched the door handle turn from across the room. This time, I could see it clearly in the flashlight beam. The handle rotated slowly downward, stopped when it hit the deadbolt, then returned to its resting position. Someone or something was testing it, checking if it would open. When it did not, the footsteps moved on. This continued every single night, always at 2 a.m., always the same routine. Footsteps circling the cabin, testing the door, checking the windows, then silence. On Sunday morning, I found muddy boot prints on the porch. Large prints, at least size 13, the tread pattern old-fashioned and worn. The prints came from the direction of the tree line, circled the entire cabin, stopped at the front door, and then simply ended. There were no prints leading back to the forest, no prints anywhere else in the clearing around the cabin. Just that one circuit, and then nothing. I took photographs with my phone, measured the prints, tried to think of rational explanations. Someone was messing with me, playing an elaborate prank. But who? I was 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, on private property, in a cabin that had been vacant for months. This required commitment that seemed absurd for a practical joke. I set up my grandfather's old trail camera that I had found in the storage closet, positioning it to face the front door. That night, Sunday night, I sat up with my grandfather's old hunting rifle across my lap, waiting. The footsteps started at 2 a.m. exactly. I watched the door handle turn. I heard breathing on the other side of the door, slow and steady, the sound of someone standing inches away from me with only a thin barrier of wood between us. I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" The breathing stopped. The footsteps resumed moving away from the door. I heard them descend the porch steps and move toward the tree line. I waited 5 minutes, then opened the door and looked out. The clearing was empty in the beam of my flashlight. I checked the trail camera the next morning. 47 photographs taken at 2-second intervals over the course of 15 minutes. Every single one showed a man standing at my door, tall, wearing old work clothes, boots, a jacket that looked decades out of style. But his face was wrong. Every photograph, despite the camera flash, showed his face in shadow. Not naturally shadowed, but obscured, like someone had taken a marker and blacked out that portion of each image. The rest of his body was clear, but where his face should have been was just darkness. I found my grandfather's journal entry from 1987 and looked at the sketch he had drawn in the margin. The same figure, same clothes, same posture, same empty darkness where the face should be. My grandfather had seen this exact man 38 years ago. The same visitor, unchanged, still coming at 2 a.m., still testing the door. I made a decision that night. I would not wait inside. I would sit on the porch before dark and confront this thing directly. I took the rifle, loaded it, and positioned myself in one of the old rocking chairs facing the tree line. I watched the sun set. I watched the stars come out. I waited. At 2 a.m., the man walked out of the forest. He moved with that same jerky, deliberate gait I had heard through, on the walls. He walked straight toward the porch, straight toward me sitting there, in plain sight. He did not react to my presence, did not turn his head, did not acknowledge me in any way. He walked up the porch steps, moved directly past me, reached for the door handle, turned it, found it locked, then turned and walked back down the steps toward the tree line. I stood up and fired the rifle into the air above his head. The sound was deafening in the quiet night. The man did not flinch, did not pause, did not react in any way. He just continued walking at the same pace until he disappeared into the shadows between the trees. I stood there, shaking, the rifle loose in my hands, understanding finally washing over me. He was not trying to get in. He was not a threat that could be stopped or reasoned with. He was trapped in a loop, repeating the same actions night after night, year after year, maybe decade after decade. I went back inside and searched through more of my grandfather's belongings until I found another journal, this one older, from 1952. A single entry in handwriting that was not my grandfather's. Found a man frozen to death on the porch this morning. Must have been trying to get inside during the blizzard last night. Door was snowed shut. I will bury him proper on the property. No identification on him. May God rest his soul. My grandfather had found a dead man on this porch in 1952. A man who had died trying to get warm, trying to get inside, spending his final moments turning that door handle while the cold killed him. And now he came back every night, still trying, still trapped in those last desperate minutes of his life, forever reaching for a door that would never open. I contacted a Catholic priest in Asheville and explained what was happening, leaving out the most unbelievable details and just saying the property had a troubling history. He agreed to come bless the cabin and perform a cleansing ritual. I watched him walk the property, sprinkling holy water, saying prayers I did not understand. That night, 2 a.m. came and went in silence. No footsteps, no door handle turning, no presence. The priest had freed him, or moved him, or ended the loop somehow. I do not know which. I sold the cabin 6 months later to a couple from Florida who wanted a vacation property. They have never reported any problems. No midnight footsteps, no visitors, no shadows where faces should be. Sometimes I wonder if I actually helped that man, if the blessing released him to wherever he was supposed to go, or if I just moved his loop somewhere else, condemned him to wander some other property, still reaching for doors that will never open. I will never know. But I still think about him on cold nights, and I always make sure my doors are unlocked from the inside, just in case. I was documenting Appalachian folk music traditions for my podcast that spring, traveling to isolated communities throughout West Virginia to record interviews with musicians who still played the old ballads and murder songs passed down through generations. At 29, I had been working on this project for nearly 2 years, visiting dozens of small towns and family gatherings, recording everything from banjo tunes to unaccompanied vocals that dated back to the Scottish and Irish immigrants who first settled these mountains. The project had gained a small but dedicated following online, and I was passionate about preserving these traditions before they disappeared completely. Most of the communities I visited were welcoming, eager to share their music and stories with someone who genuinely cared about the history. But when I reached a settlement called Hollow Creek in early April, I should have recognized the warning signs. Hollow Creek was not on any official map. I found it through a reference in a university folklore archive, a handwritten note from a researcher in 1987 mentioning a community that still practiced old traditions. The directions were vague, but I managed to locate the turnoff from a county road, following a gravel path that wound through dense forest for nearly 8 miles before opening into a small valley. The settlement consisted of maybe 15 buildings, most of them old log structures or clapboard houses that looked like they had been built 100 years ago and maintained just enough to remain standing. I counted maybe 23 people total when I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, mostly older adults with a few children playing in the dirt yards. There were no power lines that I could see, no satellite dishes, no modern conveniences visible from the road. It felt like stepping back in time. I was greeted by a man who introduced himself as Elder Thomas, though he could not have been more than 60. He was thin and weathered, with sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate me carefully before he smiled and welcomed me to Hollow Creek. I explained my project, showed him examples of my previous recordings, and asked if the community would be willing to share some of their traditional songs. Elder Thomas discussed it with several other residents, speaking in low tones I could not quite hear, then returned to tell me they would be honored to participate. They offered me a room in their community center, a larger building that served as both a gathering space and guest quarters. I accepted gratefully, noting that the sun would be setting in a few hours, and I had no desire to navigate that dark forest road at night. The recording session began around 4 p.m. in the main room of the community center. 8 people gathered, ranging in age from their 40s to what I guessed was their 80s. They sang beautiful ballads, their voices blending in harmonies that made my skin prickle with emotion. Songs about lost love, murder, betrayal, death, and hardship. The old Appalachian standards that I had heard versions of in other communities, but these renditions felt different, more authentic somehow, more connected to the original pain and joy that had inspired them. I recorded for nearly 3 hours, filling my digital recorder with what I knew would be some of the best material I had collected for the entire project. As the session wound down around 7 to 8 p.m., Elder Thomas walked me to the guest room and gave me one simple instruction. Do not go in the woods alone, and do not sing the old songs there, not ever. Do you understand? I nodded, assuming this was some kind of cultural taboo or spiritual belief that I needed to respect. I went to bed around 10 p.m., exhausted and satisfied with the day's work. The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a real bed, handmade quilts, and a small window that looked out toward the forest behind the building. I fell asleep easily, but woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of singing. At first, I thought the community was having a late-night gathering that I had not been invited to, but as I listened more carefully, I realized the voices were coming from the forest. The same songs I had recorded that afternoon, sung in perfect pitch with multiple voices harmonizing beautifully. I got out of bed and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. I could see nothing beyond the tree line, but the singing continued clear and lovely, echoing through the night air. I should have stayed in that room. I should have remembered Elder Thomas's warning. But I was a folklorist, a researcher, and the idea that there might be another group performing these songs in the middle of the night was too compelling to ignore. I grabbed my portable recorder, slipped on my shoes, and quietly left the building. The night air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of earth and pine. The singing was coming from directly behind the community center, maybe 50 yards into the trees. I walked slowly toward the sound, using my phone's flashlight to navigate through the undergrowth. The voices grew louder as I approached, more distinct, and I could count at least a dozen separate singers, all blending together in harmonies that were almost impossibly perfect. I followed the singing deeper into the forest, always staying about 50 yards behind the sound. Every time I thought I was getting close, the voices seemed to move farther ahead, maintaining that same distance. I walked for what I thought was maybe 10 minutes before I stopped and looked back. I could not see the lights of the community center. I could not see the clearing. I was surrounded by trees on all sides with no clear sense of direction. My phone showed no signal, which was not surprising this deep in the mountains. But when I tried to use the compass app, it spun wildly, unable to get a fix on any direction. The singing had stopped. The forest was completely silent. No insects, no night birds, no wind moving through the branches. Just absolute suffocating silence. I stood completely still, trying to control the panic rising in my chest, and called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice sounded flat and wrong, like the forest was absorbing the sound before it could travel. No response. I chose a direction that felt like it should lead back to the settlement and started walking. The portable recorder was still running in my hand, capturing what I hoped would be evidence of whatever I was experiencing. After walking for maybe 5 minutes, I heard the singing start again, but this time it was all around me, coming from every direction, surrounding me completely. The voices were singing the same ballads from the afternoon session, but the lyrics were different. Changed. Instead of stories about lost love and murder, they were singing about staying forever, about joining the choir, about how beautiful it was to sing in the darkness where no one could leave. I started running. Branches grabbed at my clothes and hair, roots caught my feet, but I kept moving, trying desperately to find a way out of the trees. The singing followed me, growing louder, and that was when I saw them. Figures standing between the trees, swaying slowly back and forth, their mouths open in song. They were dressed in old-style clothing, the kind you would see in photographs from the 1800s. Long dresses on the women, work clothes on the men, all of it faded and worn. But their eyes were completely white, no pupils, no iris, just blank white orbs that somehow still seemed to track my movement. There were dozens of them, maybe 50 or more, all singing in perfect harmony, all swaying in unison. I screamed and changed direction, but there were more of them ahead of me. Everywhere I turned, more figures, more voices, more empty white eyes watching me run. I do not know how long I ran through that forest. Time felt broken, stretched out like taffy. The singing never stopped. The figures never moved to block my path, but they were always there, always watching, always calling me to join them. At some point, I realized I was humming along with the melody, that my mouth was forming the words without my permission, that some part of me wanted to stop running and start singing with them. That was when I remembered Elder Thomas's second warning. Do not sing the old songs in the woods. I was humming. I was joining them without even realizing it. I clamped my hand over my mouth, physically holding my jaw shut, and forced myself to stop. The moment I went silent, the figures came closer. They did not walk. They just appeared nearer, closing the distance between us in ways that defied physics. 10 feet away, then 5 feet, then close enough that I could smell them. Old cloth, damp earth, something sweet and rotten like flowers left too long in a vase. I kept walking backwards, my hand still over my mouth, counting my steps, to give my mind something to focus on besides the terror. 1, 2, 3, 4. The figures reached toward me with pale hands, but as long as I stayed silent and kept moving, they did not touch me. 20, 21, 22. My back hit something solid. A tree, I thought at first. But when I glanced behind me, I saw the community center. I'd somehow walked in a complete circle, or the forest had deposited me back where I started, or I had never left at all. I stumbled through the tree line and collapsed in the grass behind the building. The singing stopped immediately. When I looked back at the forest, the figures were gone. The normal night sounds had returned. My phone showed 6:47 a.m. I had been gone for over 6 hours, though it had felt like maybe 30 minutes. Elder Thomas found me sitting there 20 minutes later when he came out to start his morning chores. He did not ask what happened. He just looked at my torn clothes, my scratched arms, my face streaked with tears and dirt, and nodded slowly. "You went into the woods," he said. It was not a question. I nodded. "You stopped singing," he continued. "That is why you came back." I asked him what those things were, what I had seen. He was quiet for a long time before answering. The Lost Choir. They were a church congregation from 1893. All 47 members went into the woods for an Easter sunrise service and never came back. Searchers found them 3 days later, standing in a circle, all dead, but their faces looked like they were still singing. We buried them proper, but they never left. They are still in there, still performing their service, still trying to add new voices to their choir. I packed my equipment and left Hollow Creek within an hour. I did not say goodbye to anyone except Elder Thomas, who gave me a small cloth bundle as I got in my car. Inside was a handful of salt and a handwritten note that said, "Play this for yourself at home. You need to hear it." When I got back to my apartment 2 days later and checked my portable recorder, I found that it had captured the entire experience. 6 hours and 43 minutes of audio. But when I played it back, there was nothing but static. The entire recording was corrupted, unusable, except for the final 30 seconds. In those 30 seconds, clear as day, I could hear myself singing along with the choir, my voice blending perfectly with theirs, the words about staying forever coming from my own mouth. I deleted every recording I had made in Hollow Creek, scrubbed the files from my backup drives, and never returned to West Virginia. My podcast went on hiatus shortly after. I could not bring myself to record any more music, could not listen to those old ballads without hearing the other lyrics, the wrong lyrics, the ones that called people into the woods to sing forever. 3 other folklorists have disappeared in Appalachia over the past 120 years. All of them were researching traditional music. All of them were last seen near communities that practiced the old songs. I think about them sometimes, and I wonder if they are still in those woods, standing in circles, singing with voices that should have gone silent generations ago. I had been bow hunting in the Monongahela National Forest for 15 years, always during November, always in the same 40-acre tract that my family leased from the Forest Service. At 41, I knew every deer path, every tree stand location, every ridge and hollow on that property, like I knew my own backyard. My father had hunted there before me, and his father before him, going back to when the lease was first established in 1968. It was tradition, legacy, and some of my best memories involved sitting in those woods, waiting for dawn to break while frost gathered on my jacket. I had taken probably 24 deer over the years from that same tree stand positioned along the main trail that cut through the center of the property. It was productive ground, and more importantly, it was mine in every way that mattered except the deed. Opening day of bow season that November fell on the 16th, a Thursday morning that promised to be perfect hunting weather. The forecast called for clear skies, temperatures in the high 20s, at dawn warming into the low 40s by afternoon, and a light breeze from the northwest that would carry my scent away from the main trail. I left my house in Elkins at 4:30 a.m., drove the 40 minutes to the access road, and hiked the 1.5 miles to my tree stand in darkness, using only a small red headlamp to navigate. I was in position by 5:30, secured in my harness 18 feet up an old oak tree, bow hanging from the hook beside me, ready for the long wait until legal shooting light at 6:47. These early morning hours were my favorite part of hunting. Just sitting in the darkness, listening to the forest wake up around me, feeling connected to something older and more essential than my normal life of construction sites and mortgage payments. The first light started filtering through the trees right on schedule, that gray pre-dawn glow that slowly revealed shapes and shadows. I saw the usual suspects moving through the underbrush, a few does picking their way along the trail, a young 6-point buck that was not worth taking, several squirrels making their morning rounds through the canopy. Normal November deer activity, exactly what I had been expecting. By 7:15, I had seen maybe a dozen deer total, none of them the mature buck I was hoping to find. I was settling in for what would likely be a long morning when I heard something large moving through the brush to my north, coming from the direction of the creek bed about 200 yards away. The sound was wrong immediately. Deer move through the forest with a particular rhythm, 4 legs creating a specific pattern of sound as hooves strike the ground and push through leaves. This was different. Bipedal, heavy, deliberate. Each footstep sounded like something weighing at least 200 pounds was walking upright on 2 legs rather than 4. My first thought was another hunter, though I had not seen any vehicles at the access point, and our family held the only lease for this section. I stayed perfectly still, watching the direction of the sound, assuming someone would emerge onto the trail any moment. What came out of those trees was not human. The figure was tall, maybe 7 feet, with proportions that were fundamentally wrong. Arms that hung too far down, nearly reaching its knees. Shoulders that were too broad, making the head look small by comparison. It was covered in matted hair or fur, dark brown or black. Impossible to tell exactly in the morning light filtering through the branches. The creature walked hunched forward, but still upright, moving with a strange combination of awkwardness and purpose. It emerged onto the trail about 40 yards from my tree stand and stopped, turning its head slowly from side to side like it was scanning the area. That was when I got my first clear look at the face, and my chest tightened with a fear I had never experienced in 15 years of hunting these woods. It had no nose, just a flat area where a nose should have been, with 2 vertical slits that opened and closed as it breathed. The eyes were too far apart, positioned almost on the sides of the head like a prey animal rather than a predator, but they were focused forward with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. The mouth was wrong too wide, extending farther back along the jaw than any human or animal mouth should reach. As I watched from my elevated position, the creature made a sound that I can only describe as grinding gravel mixed with metallic clicking. Not a growl, not a roar, just this horrible scraping noise that seemed to come from deep in its chest. The creature started walking along the trail, heading directly toward my tree. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay absolutely still, to make no sound, to hope that it would pass by without noticing me. But as it moved closer, I realized it was not just following the trail. It was tracking something, nose slits opening and closing rapidly, head moving back and forth with purpose. It stopped directly under my tree stand, maybe 15 feet below my position, and looked up. We made eye contact for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. Then it tilted its head at an angle that no vertebrate creature should be able to achieve, almost 90 degrees, and opened that horrible mouth. The sound that came out was my wife's voice, clear, perfect, unmistakable. "Zachary, honey, are you up there?" Not an approximation, not close enough to fool someone who did not know her well. Exactly her voice, her inflection, the pet name she had used for 20 years. Then it cycled through other voices. My daughter asking where I was. My mother calling me for dinner. My best friend from high school asking if I wanted to grab a beer. All of them perfect. All of them coming from that impossible mouth, while those eyes stared up at me without blinking. I was frozen, my entire body rigid with terror, my mind trying desperately to process what I was seeing. The creature stopped mimicking voices and started climbing my tree. It did not use equipment, did not struggle, just dug its fingers into the bark and pulled itself upward with disturbing speed. I could see now that its fingers ended in thick, curved claws that sank into the wood like it was soft clay. It moved up the trunk with purpose, and I realized in that moment that it was coming for me. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grab my bow from the hook beside me. I managed to knock an arrow, draw back with muscles that felt like water, and aim at the creature that was now maybe 10 feet below my stand. The thing stopped climbing and looked at me again, head still tilted at that wrong angle, mouth open slightly. I released the arrow at almost point-blank range. It hit the creature's shoulder with a solid thump that I felt through the tree. The creature did not react, did not flinch, did not make a sound, did not show any sign that it had been hit. The arrow just stayed there for a moment, embedded in its shoulder, then fell out. No blood, no wound, just a dark hole that seemed to close on itself, like the skin was water reforming after a rock had been thrown through it. I made a decision in that moment based entirely on panic and survival instinct. I unclipped my safety harness and started descending the tree on the opposite side from where the creature was climbing. I used the climbing pegs I had installed years ago, moving as fast as I could without falling, not looking back, just focusing on getting down and getting away. I heard it change direction, heard it moving around the trunk to follow me, heard those claws digging into bark. I dropped the final 6 feet to the ground, landed hard, and ran without looking back. I crashed through undergrowth, jumped over logs, splashed through the creek without slowing down. Behind me, I heard a heavy thud as something large hit the ground, and then I heard it pursuing me. Not running, just walking with that same deliberate pace, but somehow keeping up despite my panicked sprint. I ran for what must have been half a mile, my lungs burning, my legs cramping, branches tearing at my face and hands. When I finally broke through the tree line onto the logging road where my truck was parked, I risked a glance back. The creature was standing at the edge of the forest, maybe 200 yards behind me, perfectly still. It was not breathing hard, not showing any sign of exertion, just standing there, watching. I fumbled my keys out of my pocket, got in my truck, and started the engine with hands that would not stop shaking. As I drove away down that logging road, I watched in my rearview mirror as the creature remained at the tree line, standing motionless, until I rounded a bend and lost sight of it. I returned the next day with the county sheriff and 3 other experienced hunters, all of them armed with rifles. We found my tree stand destroyed, the metal frame bent and twisted like it had been torn apart by machinery. The climbing pegs had been ripped out of the tree trunk, leaving deep gouges in the bark. We found footprints in the soft ground near the creek, massive prints at least 18 inches long with 5 toes that spread wide like fingers. The prints were deep, indicating enormous weight, and they showed the ridge patterns of skin rather than the smooth impression of a shoe or boot. We followed the trail for 2 miles until it ended at a cliff face with a 100-foot drop. There was no way down, no indication of where the creature had gone. The prints just stopped, as if it had walked off the edge and vanished. The sheriff filed an official report describing a bear encounter, though he took me aside before leaving and told me privately that he had seen something similar in these mountains 20 years earlier while elk hunting. Whatever it is, he said, it has been here longer than we have, and it does not want us here anymore. The Forest Service closed that section of the Monongahela to hunting the following season, citing unspecified wildlife concerns. Our family lease was not renewed. They offered no explanation, no refund, just a form letter saying the area was being placed under special ecological study. I know 4 other hunting families who had leases in adjacent tracts, and all of them received the same letter within 6 months. The entire 40-acre section is now marked with signs that say area closed, no public access. No explanation is provided. I moved to coastal Virginia 2 years later, took a job doing commercial fishing instead of construction. I hunt occasionally, but never in the mountains, never in forests where the trees grow thick enough to hide something that walks on 2 legs and mimics the voices of the people you love. I'd taken a nursing contract at a rural clinic in eastern Kentucky, serving 3 small communities scattered across the mountain hollows. At 26, fresh from completing my nursing degree program the previous spring, the isolation and hands-on experience seemed perfect for building my resume before applying to bigger hospitals in Lexington or Louisville. The clinic had been advertising for months without finding anyone willing to take the position, which should have been my first warning sign. But the pay was decent, housing was included, and I had student loans that needed aggressive payments. I signed a 6-month contract and moved into the small apartment on the 2nd floor of the clinic building in early August. The building itself dated back to the 1940s, originally constructed as a tuberculosis sanatorium during the epidemic that hit Appalachia particularly hard. The architecture reflected its institutional origins with long hallways, high ceilings, tall windows with bars on the lower floors, and a general layout designed to house dozens of long-term patients rather than serve as a modern outpatient clinic. The first floor had been renovated sometime in the 1990s to create examination rooms, a small pharmacy area, a reception desk, and basic emergency care facilities. The 2nd floor, where my apartment was located, consisted mostly of empty rooms that had once been patient wards. The 3rd floor was officially condemned, access blocked by a locked door at the top of the main staircase. The clinic served a population of roughly 400 people spread across 15 miles of winding mountain roads. Most days, I saw 5 or 6 patients, treating everything from minor injuries to chronic conditions requiring medication management. The staff consisted of myself, a part-time doctor who came in 3 days a week, and a receptionist named Carol, who also handled basic administrative work. Carol was in her 50s, had worked at the clinic for 12 years, and seemed perpetually worried about something she refused to discuss. On my 3rd day, she mentioned that I would be doing on-call shifts 4 nights per week, staying overnight in the building to handle any emergencies that came up. Most nights are quiet, she told me, but keep your door locked upstairs, and if you hear anything strange, just ignore it. The building makes noises. I asked her what kind of noises, and she changed the subject so abruptly that I knew not to push further. My first 2 on-call nights were uneventful. I slept in my apartment, kept my phone nearby, and was not disturbed by anything more concerning than the usual creaks and groans of an old building. But on my 3rd night, a Thursday in late August, I heard something that made me understand Carol's nervousness. I was reading in bed around 11:00 p.m. when I heard the service elevator activate. The elevator was ancient, installed probably in the 1950s with a metal cage gate and cables that groaned whenever the car moved. But it had not been used in decades. The power had been disconnected after a safety inspection deemed it too dangerous to operate. Yet I distinctly heard the cables moving, the car ascending from the 1st floor, the gate rattling as it passed the 2nd floor, and the mechanism coming to a stop somewhere above me. On the 3rd floor, which was supposed to be empty and locked. I sat up in bed, listening carefully, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Then I heard the gate open, the distinctive metallic scrape that the accordion-style barrier made when pulled aside. Footsteps on the 3rd floor. Multiple sets of feet moving around directly above my apartment, accompanied by voices, too muffled to make out words, but clearly human in origin. I grabbed my phone and went to the hallway, looking up the main staircase toward the locked door that blocked access to the 3rd floor. The door was still closed, still locked, but I could hear the activity continuing above. After 15 minutes of standing there in the dark hallway, heart pounding, the sound stopped. The elevator did not descend again. The voices simply ceased. I went back to my apartment, locked the door, and did not sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I mentioned it to Carol, who went pale and told me not to worry about it. "Old buildings make strange sounds," she said. "Pipes, wind, animals in the walls." But her hands were shaking as she sorted through papers on her desk, and she avoided eye contact for the rest of the day. That night was Friday, not my on-call shift, so I drove into town and stayed at a cheap motel, grateful for the distance from the clinic. But when my next on-call night came around on Sunday, I had no choice but to return. The same pattern repeated. Around 11:00 p.m., the elevator activated. This time, I went down to the 1st floor and physically checked the elevator car. It was on the ground level, gate closed, interior dark, but I could still hear the cables moving in the shaft, hear the ghostly car ascending past me toward the 3rd floor. I followed the sound up the staircase and stood at the locked door again. Through the thin wood, I heard what sounded like a medical procedure taking place. Metal instruments clinking against metal trays, multiple voices giving instructions, someone moaning in pain. I pressed my ear against the door and listened. The voices were discussing a surgery, using outdated medical terminology I recognized from historical texts, terms for procedures and instruments that had not been used since the 1940s. This continued every night I stayed in the building. Different floors, different scenes playing out like recordings from the past. Sometimes I would see them in the hallways as I moved through the building during my rounds. Patients in hospital gowns from the 1940s, wandering confused, asking for doctors who had been dead for 70 years. They were translucent, not quite solid, but they cast shadows that were fully opaque and wrong. I watched a full surgical team performing an operation in what was now an empty storage room. They were covered in blood, working frantically on a patient whose chest was open, whose breathing was desperate and failing. The doctors looked frustrated, exhausted, like they had been trying to save this patient for hours without success. None of them seemed to notice me standing in the doorway watching. They were locked in their own moment, replaying it over and over. On my 8th night in the building, one of them finally acknowledged my presence. I was in the second-floor hallway around 2 a.m., checking on a noise I had heard from one of the empty rooms. A patient appeared in the hallway, a man in his 40s wearing a stained hospital gown, barefoot, face gaunt and pale. He looked directly at me, his eyes focusing with an awareness that the other ghost had not shown. He walked toward me, moving slowly, one hand pressed against his chest like he was having trouble breathing. "Please," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "I need help. The treatment is not working. I cannot breathe." He reached out toward me with his other hand, and I backed away instinctively. "Please," he repeated. "They keep trying the same things, but nothing helps. It hurts so much." I backed into the supply closet and locked the door, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. Through the thin door, I could hear him outside, shuffling back and forth, whispering about his breathing problems, about pain, about needing help. I could see his shadow under the door, his bare feet moving in small circles. He stayed there for 2 hours, while I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, too terrified to move. When morning finally came, and sunlight started filtering through the small window, his shadow disappeared. I opened the door carefully. The hallway was empty. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. I spent that day in the basement records room, searching through old files until I found the patient records from the sanatorium years. The building had housed 300 patients at its peak in 1947. Experimental treatments were common, many of them brutal by modern standards. Procedures involving collapsing lungs, removing ribs, injecting various substances directly into diseased tissue. The mortality rate was horrifying. 89 deaths recorded in just 6 months, from January through June of 1947. But when I cross-referenced those deaths with the county cemetery records, I found only 86 burial plots. 3 patients were unaccounted for. No grave markers, no burial dates, nothing. I searched through more files and found their names. Thomas Hendricks, age 42, died March 15, 1947. Sarah Mitchell, age 34, died April 2, 1947. James Lawson, age 51, died May 28, 1947. All 3 died from tuberculosis complications. All 3 had no listed next of kin, and Thomas Hendricks matched the description of the patient who had spoken to me in the hallway. I found his admission photo attached to his medical file. The same gaunt face, the same desperate eyes. I completed my 6-week contract because I had signed legal documents and could not afford to break them, but I did not renew. The next nurse lasted 3 nights before quitting with no explanation. The nurse, after that, made it 1 week. The clinic now only operates during daylight hours, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Overnight emergencies are redirected to the hospital 40 miles away in the county seat. Carol eventually told me why after I had been gone for 3 months and called to check in. She said the building is too active at night. The too many staff members have been traumatized by what they have experienced. Better to close overnight than keep trying to find nurses willing to stay in a building where the dead have never left. I still get phone calls on my cell phone, always around 11 p.m., always from numbers I do not recognize. When I answer, there is just static for a few seconds. Then I hear voices in the background. Old intercom systems paging doctors with names from the 1940s. Dr. Henderson to the 2nd floor, Dr. Mitchell to surgery. Then the call ends. I change my number twice. The calls continue. Last month I received one at 11:03 p.m. After the usual static and intercom voices, I heard Thomas Hendricks speaking. "Please come back," he said. "We are still here. We still need help." I did not answer. I just hung up and turned off my phone. But I know he is right. They are still there, trapped in that building, reliving their suffering every single night. And there is nothing I or anyone else can do to help them. I had worked as a fire lookout in the George Washington National Forest for 3 summers, enjoying the isolation and the view from my 60-foot tower. At 30, I preferred the solitude of the mountains over any office job, and the seasonal work allowed me to spend winters doing carpentry projects that actually interested me, rather than punching a clock for someone else's profit. The lookout position was perfect for my temperament. 8-week rotations from June through August, living in a small cabin at the base of the tower, spending my days scanning the horizon for smoke, and my nights reading by lantern light. The tower was accessible only by a 2-mile hiking trail from the nearest forest road, which meant I went days at a time without seeing another person. My only regular contact with the outside world came through the 2-way radio I used to report the weather conditions and check in with the ranger station twice daily. The tower itself had been built in 1958, part of a network of fire observation posts that once covered the national forests, before aerial surveillance made most of them obsolete. Mine was one of only 3 still actively staffed in the entire forest system, maintained more out of tradition and backup redundancy than actual necessity. The structure was solid steel, painted forest green, with a wooden cabin at the top that measured maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, windows on all sides, a basic desk with firefighting equipment, a narrow cot, a small propane stove, and not much else. The living quarters at the base were more comfortable. A 1-room cabin with a real bed, a wood stove for cooking, storage for 2 months' worth of supplies, and an outhouse about 50 yards into the trees. Every Friday, a ranger hiked in with fresh supplies, mail if I had any, and a brief conversation that usually lasted less than 15 minutes before they headed back out. My first 2 summers had been completely uneventful. Peaceful, meditative, exactly what I wanted. But this 3rd summer, starting in early June, things felt different from the beginning. Small things at first. Items in the cabin would be in different positions when I came down from the tower at sunset. My coffee mug moved from the left side of the table to the right. A book I was reading left open to a different page than where I had stopped. The chair turned to face the door instead of the window. I assumed the ranger was stopping by unscheduled, checking on the cabin while I was up in the tower during the day. But when I asked about it over the radio, the ranger confirmed that no one had been to my location except for their regular Friday supply run. The incidents escalated during my 2nd week. I started finding muddy footprints on the cabin floor, boot prints that were not mine, tracking in from the door and wandering around the room before disappearing. No prints leading to or from the cabin outside, just the ones inside. On Sunday night, around 2:03 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps on the tower stairs. The metallic clanging of boots on steel steps ascending slowly and deliberately. I sat up in my bed in the cabin, listening to the sounds coming from above. Someone was climbing the tower in the middle of the night. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside, looking up at the spiral staircase that wrapped around the tower structure. I saw a light moving up the stairs, the beam of a flashlight sweeping back and forth as someone climbed. I called out, "Who is up there? This is a restricted area." No response. The light kept moving upward, one slow step at a time. I started climbing the stairs myself, following the light above me. My own flashlight beam swept across the steps, the railings, the tower structure, but I could not see anyone. Just that other light, always about 20 feet above me, continuing to climb. When I reached the observation cabin at the top, the door was closed and locked from the inside, exactly how I had left it when I descended for the night. I unlocked it and went inside. Empty. No one there. No light. My firefighting equipment was untouched, my logbook exactly where I had left it. I searched every corner of the small space, but there was nowhere to hide. I climbed back down, shaken and confused, and spent the rest of the night sitting on my cabin porch with a baseball bat across my lap, watching the tower. The next night, Monday, I decided to stay in the observation cabin at the top of the tower instead of sleeping in the ground cabin. I locked myself in, wedged a chair under the door handle, and tried to sleep on the narrow cot. Around 3:00 a.m., I heard the door to my ground cabin opening, The distinctive creak of the hinges echoed up through the quiet night air. I went to the window and looked down. From 60 feet up, I could see my cabin clearly in the moonlight. The door was standing open. As I watched, a figure emerged, tall, wearing clothes that looked like mine, moving with my gait. The figure walked away from the cabin toward the tree line, then stopped and turned back to look up at the tower. Even from this distance, even in the dim light, I could see that the figure looked exactly like me. Same build, same hair, same face. My doppelganger stood there for maybe 30 seconds looking up at where I was hiding, then raised one hand and waved slowly. The gesture was mocking, deliberate. Then it turned and walked into the forest. I did not climb down until the sun came up. When I finally descended and entered my cabin, I found it destroyed. Furniture overturned, my clothes torn and scattered across the floor, food supplies dumped out of their containers. My personal photographs ripped into pieces. On the wall above my bed, scratched deep into the wood, was a message: "Leave." I radioed the ranger station immediately, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the transmitter. I reported a break-in, vandalism, requested immediate assistance. The ranger who responded, a veteran named Patterson, who had worked these forests for 20 years, arrived 3 hours later with another ranger for backup. They documented everything, took photographs, searched the surrounding area for tracks. Patterson seemed unsettled in a way that went beyond professional concern. As we sat on my cabin porch reviewing what had happened, he pulled out a folder from his pack. "You're not the first," he said, opening the folder to show me incident reports dating back to 1978. The lookout position had been staffed intermittently over the decades, and at least 4 previous lookouts had reported similar experiences. Items moving, footsteps on the tower stairs, seeing their own doubles. The reports were eerily consistent. Patterson showed me the final report from 1978, written by a lookout named James Cordell. His last radio transmission, documented word for word. "He is up here with me now, in the cabin. He looks exactly like me, but he is not me. He is smiling, but it is wrong. I do not think I am getting down from this tower." James Cordell was never seen again. Search teams found his camping gear, his clothing, his identification, all abandoned at the base of the tower. No body, no trace of where he went. The tower was closed for 15 years after that, reopened in 1993 with new safety protocols and warnings that were apparently never shared with subsequent lookouts. Patterson explained that 3 other lookouts since 1993 had reported identical experiences. All of them had requested immediate transfer. All of them reported seeing their doubles, hearing footsteps, finding their belongings destroyed. The tower should have been permanently closed, Patterson said, but the Forest Service kept it operational for reasons that were never clearly explained to field staff. "I think someone at the regional office wants to see if it keeps happening," he told me. "Like we are running some kind of experiment up here." He offered to help me pack my gear and escort me out immediately. I accepted. We spent 2 hours loading my belongings into backpacks, and I took one last look at the tower that had been my home for 3 weeks. Patterson said the position would likely be filled by drone surveillance going forward, that I was probably the last human lookout who would ever staff this location. We hiked out together, and I never returned to fire lookout work. 6 months later, I received a Facebook message from an account that had been created the day after I left the forest. The account had my name, my profile picture from 5 years ago, and only one friend, me. The message was simple: "Still waiting in the tower. When are you coming back?" I reported the account, had it deleted, but similar accounts keep appearing, always created from IP addresses that Facebook traces to the general vicinity of the George Washington National Forest. Always with my old photos, my information, always sending the same message. The tower was officially decommissioned in 2024, replaced by automated camera systems that upload images to a central monitoring station. But hikers still report seeing a figure at the top of the tower, standing in the observation cabin windows, waving at them from 60 feet up. Park rangers who investigate always find the tower empty, the door locked, no sign of entry. But the reports continue. Last month, a backpacker posted a photograph on social media that went viral in the hiking community. A long-distance shot of my old tower, taken with a telephoto lens from a neighboring ridge. In the window of the observation cabin, clearly visible, is a figure. The image quality is good enough to make out details. The figure is wearing the same clothes I wore during my summer there. Same green work shirt, same baseball cap, and the face, enhanced and zoomed in by multiple people online, looks exactly like mine. The Park Service has no explanation. They insist the tower is locked, unstaffed, inaccessible. But I know what is up there. A version of me that never left, that is still waiting for something, that has claimed that space as its own. Sometimes I think about driving back, hiking that trail one more time, climbing those stairs to see what is really waiting at the top. But I know I will not, because whatever is up there wearing my face, using my name, it is not me. And I do not want to find out what happens if we ever meet again. I organized a weekend backpacking trip for my hiking group that October, planning to cover 25 miles of the Art Loeb Trail in North Carolina over 3 days. At 35, I had led dozens of trips over the past 8 years, always prepared, always cautious, and I prided myself on never having a serious incident under my leadership. My group consisted of 7 people total, including myself, all in our 30s and 40s, all experienced backpackers who had hiked together multiple times before. We knew each other's capabilities, trusted each other's judgment, and had established protocols for everything from navigation to medical emergencies. This was supposed to be a straightforward autumn trip, enjoying the fall colors and cool weather, covering familiar terrain on a well-marked and heavily trafficked trail. We departed Friday afternoon from the southern trailhead, each of us carrying full packs with 3 days of food, water filtration systems, proper cold weather gear, and all the standard safety equipment. Our permits were filed with the Forest Service, emergency contacts were listed, and we had checked the weather forecast repeatedly in the days leading up to departure. Everything indicated perfect conditions, clear skies, temperatures in the 50s during the day and 30s at night, minimal wind. The first day went exactly as planned. We hiked 10 miles through beautiful terrain, the trail markers visible every 100 yards, the path clear and well maintained. We made camp at a designated site around 5 p.m., cooked dinner together, shared stories around the campfire, and turned in around 10 p.m. I fell asleep feeling satisfied that the trip was off to an excellent start. Saturday morning, we broke camp at 8 a.m. after a quick breakfast and continued north on the trail. The weather remained perfect, the group's pace was steady, and everyone seemed in good spirits. We stopped for a brief rest and snack break around 10:30, then continued hiking. That was when things started to feel wrong. Around 10:45, I noticed we had not seen a trail marker in longer than usual. The Art Loeb Trail was marked with white blazes painted on trees every 50 to 100 yards. Impossible to miss if you were paying attention. I stopped the group and backtracked maybe a quarter mile, looking for the last marker we had passed. I found it, a clear white blaze on an oak tree, but continuing forward from that point, the next marker simply did not exist. We spread out across 50 yards, all of us searching, and found nothing. My GPS unit showed that we were still on the trail according to the coordinates, but the landscape around us looked different than what the topographical map indicated. The trees were the wrong species. We should have been moving through predominantly oak and hickory forest, but we were surrounded by pine trees that should not have been growing at this elevation. The rock formations visible through the trees did not match the map either. We stopped and discussed options. The consensus was to backtrack to our last confirmed position and try again. We walked back half a mile to the marker we had found, but when we reached that spot, the trail behind us looked completely unfamiliar. Nothing matched what we had just walked through. The terrain was different. The trees were different. Even the light seemed wrong somehow. Sarah, one of the more experienced members of the group, suggested we follow a compass bearing due north toward where the nearest forest road should be, bypassing the trail entirely. We agreed and set off, moving carefully through the undergrowth, checking the compass every few minutes to maintain our heading. After 3 hours of hiking, we should have covered at least 6 miles and reached the road. Instead, we emerged into a clearing that I recognized immediately. It was the same clearing where we had stopped for our snack break at 10:30. We had walked in a complete circle, despite maintaining a consistent compass bearing. That should have been impossible. The group was starting to show signs of real concern. We took inventory of our supplies, calculated our water and food reserves, and tried to understand what was happening. My GPS unit was still showing coordinates, but when I checked the track log, it displayed an impossible loop, showing us crossing over the same coordinates multiple times from different directions. Michael, who had been a Marine and had extensive navigation training, checked his own GPS. Same result, our watches were showing different times. Mine said 2:15 p.m., Sarah's said 1:45 p.m., Michael's said 3:30 p.m., and the others ranged across a 6-hour span. We had all synchronized our watches that morning. This made no sense. We decided to set up camp in the clearing and wait for daylight the next morning to reassess. 2 members of the group, Jennifer and Tom, argued that we should keep moving, that staying in one place was giving up. But 4 of us, including myself, felt that exhausting ourselves by hiking in circles would only make things worse. We compromised by agreeing to try the radio. Michael had a handheld emergency radio that could reach park rangers on designated frequencies. He tried multiple channels and got a response on the 3rd attempt, but the voice that came through was speaking a language none of us recognized. Not Spanish, not French, not any language we could identify. The cadence sounded old-fashioned, the audio quality poor, like it was coming through ancient equipment. Michael asked for help in English, repeated our situation, but the voice just continued in that unknown language before cutting off entirely. We made camp as the sun began to set, except the sun set in less than 15 minutes. One moment, it was afternoon light. The next moment, it was deep twilight, and then full darkness without any gradual transition. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in minutes, and we scrambled to get our tents up and sleeping bags out. Once we were set up, we built a fire and huddled around it, no one wanting to be alone in their tents. That was when we heard the footsteps. Multiple sets, walking just beyond the reach of our firelight, circling our camp slowly and deliberately. We called out, asking who was there, but got no response. The footsteps continued for hours, always maintaining the same distance, never coming close enough for us to see who or what was making them. Around what my watch claimed was 2:00 a.m., we started hearing voices. Our own voices calling to each other from the darkness. "Sarah, where are you?" in my voice. "Michael, I need help over here," in Tom's voice. Perfect mimicry, but none of us were speaking. We stayed close together, accounted for all 7 people, confirmed that everyone was in the camp. But the voices continued, calling back and forth, having conversations that sounded exactly like us discussing navigation and planning. Jennifer started crying, saying she wanted to go home, that this was not natural. Sarah held her and told her we would get out in the morning. Dawn came as suddenly as sunset had gone. No gradual lightening, just instant full daylight. We broke camp immediately and found a fresh trail marker 20 yards from where we had slept. Bright white paint, clearly visible, positioned on a tree that we had examined multiple times the previous day and found unmarked. We followed the markers, moving quickly, and within 1 hour we emerged at a parking lot. Our cars were there, exactly where we had left them 2 days earlier, except the cars were covered in leaves like they had been sitting for weeks, and the parking lot was empty except for our vehicles. No other hikers, no rangers, no one. We drove to the nearest ranger station, 3 of us carpooling together, and reported what had happened. The ranger on duty listened to our story with an expression that suggested he had heard similar accounts before. He checked our permit and frowned. "Your entry permit was logged at 3:15 p.m. yesterday," he said. "You have been gone less than 24 hours, according to our records." We argued that we had been on the trail for 2 full days and 2 nights. He showed us the timestamp on our entry permit. Friday, 3:15 p.m. It was now Saturday, 4:30 p.m. Our watches, which had been showing wildly different times in the forest, all now displayed the correct time. He took detailed statements from all of us, writing everything down in a notebook that he seemed reluctant to share with anyone else. After we finished, he asked to speak with me privately. "You're not the first group to report this kind of experience on that section of trail," he told me. "Since 1995, 12 different hiking parties have described entering a version of the trail where navigation breaks down, where time does not work correctly, where they encounter things that should not be there. Most of them found their way, out within a day. 2 groups never made it back. They are listed as missing, presumed lost in the wilderness, but we never found any trace of them. No bodies, no gear, nothing." He showed me missing persons files for those 2 groups. 8 people total, all experienced hikers, all vanished without explanation from the same trail section we had just escaped from. I asked him what he thought was happening out there. He shook his head. "Officially, I would tell you it was disorientation, panic, mass hysteria. People get lost, their minds play tricks. They make up stories to explain their confusion. But unofficially," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "that trail passes through some of the oldest mountains on Earth. The Appalachians were here before humans, before most species we recognize today. Maybe there are places that do not want us walking through them. Maybe there are spaces between what we consider normal reality. I have worked these forests for 30 years, and I have seen things that no training manual prepared me for. The trail section where we got lost now has warning signs posted about magnetic anomalies that can affect GPS and compass navigation. The official explanation from the Forest Service is that unusual mineral deposits create interference with electronic equipment. But those of us who experienced it know that explanation is inadequate. 3 members of my hiking group refuse to enter Appalachian forests anymore. They have relocated to western states, where they hike in the Rockies or the Cascades, claiming those mountains feel different, safer somehow. I retired from leading group hikes entirely. I only do solo day hikes now, never overnight, never far from established parking areas. The confidence I once had in my navigation skills is permanently broken. My GPS unit still has the track log saved from that trip. I have tried to delete it multiple times, tried to format the device and start fresh, but the file remains. And every time I look at it, the pattern has changed slightly. The loop we walked is different, showing us in different locations, crossing paths that do not exist on any map. I have transferred the file to 3 different computers, and it corrupts the mapping software every time, causing programs to crash or display impossible geography. A cartographer friend who specializes in GPS data analysis looked at the file and told me it was not possible for the coordinates to exist in our physical reality. The elevations are wrong, the distances are wrong, the mathematical relationships between points violate known physics. Yet we walked that loop. We experienced those hours that were not ours. We heard our own voices calling from darkness. And somewhere in those mountains, there is still a version of that trail where 2 other groups are wandering, looking for markers that keep moving, trying to find a way back to a world that may have forgotten them entirely. I was exploring abandoned coal mining communities for my documentary photography project, capturing the decay of Appalachian industry and the ghost towns left behind when the mines closed. At 27, I had shot dozens of abandoned sites across Virginia and West Virginia without any problems beyond the occasional encounter with suspicious locals or property owners. My work focused on the intersection of industrial history and human memory, documenting structures that would eventually collapse or be demolished, preserving them in photographs before they disappeared entirely. Most of my shoots were day trips, but for particularly remote locations, I would camp overnight to capture both golden hour light and night photography. The former company town called Blackwater seemed perfect for an overnight shoot. Blackwater had been evacuated in 1962 after a catastrophic mine collapse that killed 47 workers. The entire population, roughly 300 people, relocated within 6 months, and the town was officially abandoned by 1963. But unlike most ghost towns, Blackwater had been left remarkably intact. The company that owned the mine went bankrupt during litigation over the disaster, and the property fell into legal limbo for decades. No one demolished the buildings, no one salvaged the materials, and no one officially prohibited access despite the no trespassing signs that had faded to near illegibility. I had researched the location for months, found the access roads on old county maps, and confirmed with the current legal owner, a holding company that seemed to have forgotten they possessed the deed, that I could photograph the site for educational purposes. I arrived on a Saturday afternoon in late September, driving my Jeep up a gravel road that was barely passable after years of washouts and vegetation overgrowth. The town sat in a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges, accessible only from the south through a gap that the mine road had originally followed. When I emerged from the tree line and saw the town spread out before me, I felt the familiar excitement of discovering a well-preserved site. Most ghost towns I had photographed were picked clean, vandalized, or collapsed beyond recognition. Blackwater looked like everyone had just walked away yesterday. Houses with intact windows, the company store with faded advertisements still visible in the glass, a church with its steeple straight and true, even the school building with playground equipment, rusting but still standing. I parked near the company store and spent the rest of the afternoon shooting exteriors, documenting the layout, capturing the way autumn light fell across the abandoned streets. As the sun began to set around 7:15 p.m., I decided to enter the company store for interior shots. The building was a 2-story structure with retail space on the ground floor and what had apparently been employee quarters or offices on the second floor. The front door was unlocked, the hinges groaning as I pushed it open. Inside, the store was frozen in time. Shelves still held products from the early 1960s, prices marked in cents, brand names I barely recognized. Canned goods, work clothes, tools, household supplies, everything covered in dust but otherwise undisturbed. I spent an hour photographing the interior, using my camera's flash to illuminate corners that had not seen light in 60 years. The composition was perfect, the decay beautiful in its melancholy. Around 8:30 p.m., I climbed the stairs to the second floor to photograph the employee quarters. At the top of the stairs, I found a hallway with 4 rooms branching off. The first 3 were empty, stripped of furniture, just bare walls and windows, but the 4th room, at the end of the hall, was furnished. A bed was made with blankets that looked clean, men's clothing was draped over a chair, a coffee cup sat on a small table beside the bed, and the cup was warm to the touch. I pulled my hand back like I had been burned. The coffee was still warm. Someone had been here, maybe was still here. I called out, "Hello? Is someone living here? I don't mean to intrude." No response. The room was maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, and there was nowhere to hide. But the warmth of that coffee cup was undeniable. I descended the stairs quickly, my heart racing, and tried to leave the building. The front door would not open. I turned the handle, pushed hard, but it would not budge. It was not locked or jammed, it just would not move, like the door had become part of the wall. I tried the back door with the same result. The windows on the ground floor were painted shut from the outside, and breaking them felt dangerous, given that I did not know if someone else was in the building with me. I checked my phone for signal, but had nothing. I had known there would be no service in this valley. It was one of the dead zones that plague rural Appalachia. I decided to wait, thinking whoever had been in that room would eventually reveal themselves, and we could sort this out. As full darkness fell outside, I heard voices. Multiple men talking outside the building, their voices carrying clearly through the walls. They were discussing shift changes, using terminology I recognized from my research into coal mining operations. Talking about the day shift, the night shift, who was going down into the mine, who was coming back up. The voices sounded casual, normal, like workers finishing their day. I went to the window and looked out. Men were walking past the company store, maybe a dozen of them, all wearing the kind of work clothes I had seen in photographs from the 1960s. Canvas pants, heavy jackets, work boots, lunch pails in their hands, helmet lamps on their heads. They were talking to each other, laughing, complaining about the cold, making plans for the evening. I watched them walk down the street toward the mine entrance at the far end of town. I banged on the window, shouting for help, but none of them turned to look. They walked past like I did not exist, their conversation continuing uninterrupted. When the last of them disappeared around a corner, I heard another sound. The mine alarm, a loud bell that I knew from historical accounts had been used to signal shift changes and emergencies. The alarm rang for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Immediately after, I heard shouting. Men yelling, voices full of panic and fear. The alarm started again, this time continuous, desperate. I watched through the window as men started running back toward the town from the direction of the mine, their faces twisted with horror. They were screaming about a collapse, about water, about people trapped underground. More men emerged from houses running toward the mine to help. Women appeared in doorways, holding children, crying. The chaos continued for what felt like hours. I watched the entire disaster unfold from inside the company store, a spectator to a tragedy that had happened 63 years ago. I saw men carrying bodies, saw families collapsing in grief, saw the moment when the rescue efforts stopped and everyone understood that those still underground were not coming back. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The people disappeared. The street was empty. When I looked at my watch, it was only 10:45 p.m. The entire experience had lasted just over 2 hours, though it had felt much longer. The front door opened easily now. I stumbled outside into the cold night air, my camera still hanging from my neck. I looked around the town, and everything had changed. The buildings were ruins again. Windows broken, roofs collapsed, vegetation growing through foundations. The street I had just watched filled with panicking miners was nothing but cracked pavement and weeds. I ran to my Jeep and checked my camera. I had been taking photographs throughout the evening, documenting what I was seeing. I scrolled through the images on the small screen. The interior shots from before sunset looked normal, exactly what I had intended to capture. But the photos I had taken after dark, the ones I had shot through the window of the people in the street, they showed something impossible. The people were there, clear and sharp, faces visible, name tags on their work shirts readable. I had photographed ghosts, or a replay of history, or something I did not have words for. I drove out of that valley immediately, navigating the rough road in darkness, without stopping until I reached pavement. I did not stop driving until I was back in my apartment in Charleston 3 hours later. The next morning, I downloaded all the photos from my camera and examined them carefully. The images of the miners were crystal clear. I could read names on their clothing, see details of their faces, identify individuals. I cross-referenced those names with the memorial at the mine entrance, which I had photographed earlier in the day. 12 of the men visible in my evening photographs matched names on the memorial list of the 47 who had died in the collapse. I published some of the photos in a small exhibition 6 months later, carefully curated to show the abandoned town without revealing the supernatural elements. But people noticed. Family members of the victims contacted me asking how I had obtained photographs of their relatives. insisting that I must have used old family photos or historical archives. They accused me of exploiting their family's tragedy, of staging the images somehow. The accusations became hostile enough that I closed the exhibition early and archived everything. 3 paranormal investigation teams requested to accompany me back to Blackwater, offering money, equipment, publicity. I refused every request. I tried to return to the site once, about a year later, thinking I needed to understand what I had experienced. I drove to where the access road should have been and found nothing. The gap in the ridge was gone, or I could not find it, or it had never existed the way I remembered. My GPS showed the correct coordinates, but the terrain did not match. I hiked into the area on foot and found no trace of Blackwater. No buildings, no foundations, no streets, nothing but forest that looked like it had been undisturbed for a century. Local historians I contacted said Blackwater appears and disappears on a cycle they do not understand, that it becomes accessible every 15 to 20 years for brief windows of time before vanishing again. The next appearance is calculated for sometime around 2043. I will be in my 50s by then. I do not know if I will try to find it again. I had just started my position as a 911 dispatcher for 3 rural counties in Tennessee, covering hundreds of square miles of mountain territory that stretched from the Kentucky border down through some of the most isolated hollows in the state. At 23, fresh from completing my certification program, I thought the night shift would be quiet, routine work, mostly false alarms and weather-related calls from elderly residents who panicked during storms. The training had emphasized mountain rescue protocols, mine emergencies, and wildlife encounters, but nothing prepared me for the call that would repeat itself every few days for the next 3 months. The dispatch center was a small cinder block building located just outside the county seat, usually staffed by 2 or 3 dispatchers depending on the shift. Our coverage area included roughly 8,000 people scattered across 400 square miles, most of them living in communities with names that did not appear on any official map. I started my position in early March, taking the overnight shift from Thursday through Sunday. The pay differential for nights was substantial, and at my age with student loans to pay off, the extra money mattered more than a normal sleep schedule. My training dispatcher was a woman named Ruth, who had been working the job for nearly 15 years. She was in her late 50s, calm and professional, the kind of person who could talk someone through a medical emergency without ever raising her voice or showing panic. On my 3rd week, during a slow Thursday night around 2:47 a.m., we received a call from a restricted number. Ruth's face went pale when she saw the display, and she gestured for me to listen in on her headset while she took the call. The voice was male, calm, and polite, saying he was lost in the woods near Hangman's Ridge. He asked for help finding the trail back to the parking area, describing landmarks that Ruth carefully noted while dispatching a ranger to the coordinates. The caller stayed on the line, making small talk, asking Ruth how her night was going, whether it had been busy. His tone was friendly, conversational, like he was chatting with an acquaintance rather than requesting emergency assistance. Ruth kept the conversation professional but brief, confirming that help was on the way, asking him to stay where he was. After about 8 minutes, the ranger radioed back saying he had reached the coordinates and found no one there. No tracks, no evidence anyone had been in that area recently. Ruth terminated the call and the man said thank you and hung up without protest. After the call ended, Ruth sat in silence for a moment, then turned to me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Fear. She explained that the same call came in every few months, always from a restricted number, always the same voice, always claiming to be lost near Hangman's Ridge. Rangers had responded dozens of times over the past 12 years. No one was ever there. The voice always asked personal questions about the dispatcher, remembered details from previous calls, seemed to know things he should not know. The last dispatcher, who had engaged with the caller extensively, answering his questions and chatting beyond what was professionally necessary, quit after a week. Ruth refused to tell me why, just said that I should follow protocol if I ever received the call. Answer professionally. Dispatch help. End the call as quickly as possible. Do not give personal information. Do not engage. The next Thursday at 2:51 a.m., my console lit up with an incoming call from a restricted number. I answered following standard protocol, and the same voice greeted me. He apologized for calling again, said he was still having trouble finding his way out of the woods near Hangman's Ridge. I dispatched a ranger to the coordinates he provided, staying professional and brief. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "That is a nice car you drive, Olivia. The blue Honda Civic. Is it a 2018 or 2019 model? I could never tell the difference with those years." I had never mentioned my name beyond the initial greeting, and I had certainly never discussed my vehicle. My car was parked behind the dispatch building, not visible from any public road, in a lot that was supposed to be secure and staff only. I looked at the security monitor that showed the back parking lot. My car was visible under the exterior lights, and standing next to it was a figure, tall, wearing what looked like old hiking gear, facing toward the camera. When I looked closer, trying to make out details, the figure raised one hand and waved. Slowly, deliberately, like he knew I was watching. I felt my throat close up with fear. The caller was still on the line, talking about the weather, about how cold it got in these mountains at night, about how he appreciated me taking the time to help him. I interrupted, asked him where exactly he was calling from. He laughed, not unkindly, and said, "You know where I am, Olivia. I'm always in the same place. Have been for a very long time now." I terminated the call and checked the monitor again. The figure was gone. I unlocked the dispatch room door and ran outside to the parking lot, my heart hammering. No one was there. No footprints in the damp ground around my car, no sign anyone had been standing in that spot. But under my windshield wiper was a note, handwritten on paper that looked old and brittle. The ink was faded but legible. "Thank you for talking with me. See you next Thursday, 2:47 a.m. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. Ruth came outside and found me standing there, read the note, and immediately called the county sheriff. The sheriff arrived within 20 minutes, took the note as evidence, searched the entire property with 2 deputies. They found nothing. Ruth pulled out a folder from a locked file cabinet in the dispatch office, something she had not shown me during training. It contained incident reports dating back to 2011. The first documented call from the restricted number. 73 calls total over 12 years, all between 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m., all reporting being lost near Hangman's Ridge. The voice in every recording was identical. Same pitch, same cadence, same polite demeanor. Ruth played several of the recordings for me. The voice was unmistakable, but what made my skin crawl was listening to the progression. In early calls, he seemed confused, genuinely lost. By 2015, he was more conversational, asking about the dispatchers personally. By 2018, he was describing details he should not have known. One dispatcher's house, another dispatcher's children, personal information that was not public record. The sheriff pulled up a missing persons case from 2009. A hiker named Marcus Devlin had disappeared during a night hike near Hangman's Ridge in October of that year. His car was found at the trailhead, his camping gear found about 2 miles in, but Marcus himself was never located despite extensive searches. The family had provided a voicemail recording for the investigation, something Marcus had left his sister a week before he disappeared. The sheriff played it for us. The voice was identical to our caller. Marcus Devlin had been dead, or at least missing and presumed dead, for 2 years before the first 911 call came in. His body had never been found. The searches had covered hundreds of acres, used dogs and helicopters, and thermal imaging. Nothing. The calls continued every 8 to 12 days for the next 3 months. Always overnight. Always from a restricted number. always the same request for help. He started asking about me specifically. Where had I gone to school? Did I have family in the area? Was I seeing anyone romantically? Questions that felt invasive, wrong, delivered in that same polite and friendly tone. Ruth taught me to give minimal responses, to redirect to the emergency at hand, to end calls quickly. But he always managed to slip in some detail that proved he was watching. He mentioned the coffee shop I stopped at on my way to work, the grocery store where I shopped, the friend's house I visited on my days off. He knew my routes, my schedule, my life. After 2 months, I requested a transfer to day shift. My supervisor approved it immediately, no questions asked, like she had been expecting the request. The night dispatcher who replaced me lasted 3 weeks before also requesting a transfer. The next one made it 5 days. The county eventually changed protocols, requiring all overnight emergency calls from that region to be routed to a centralized state dispatch center 40 miles away rather than our local facility. The official explanation was budget consolidation, but everyone who worked there knew the real reason. The current system has been in place for 18 months, but according to Ruth, who still works day shifts, the calls continue. The state dispatchers report receiving them regularly. Same voice, same story, same lost hiker near Hangman's Ridge who is never there when help arrives. I changed my phone number twice after leaving the position, moved to a different apartment complex, altered my daily routines. But every few weeks my phone rings at odd hours, always between 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. When I answer, there's static for a few seconds, then voices in the background. Old intercom sounds like dispatch equipment from decades ago, crackling and distant. Then I hear him. "Hello, Olivia. I was hoping you would answer. I have been trying to reach you." I hang up immediately, but the calls keep coming. The numbers are always different, always showing as restricted or unknown, and my phone company cannot trace them. They originate from cell towers in the region near Hangman's Ridge, but that proves nothing. Anyone could be calling from that area. Last month, a hiker posted a photograph on social media taken from the ridge trail at dawn. In the background, barely visible in the tree line, is a figure. The image quality is poor, shot with a phone camera in low light, but several people enhanced it and shared the results. The figure is wearing hiking gear that looks decades out of date, and his face, pixelated and unclear, looks wrong somehow. Too pale, too gaunt, like someone who has not eaten in years. Park rangers investigated after the photo went viral but found nothing unusual in the area. The hiker who took the photo said they felt like they were being watched the entire time they were on that trail. Heard footsteps paralleling their path just out of sight. Heard someone calling for help, but could never locate the source. I do not hike anymore. I stay away from rural areas, avoid overnight shifts in any job, keep my phone on silent during the early morning hours. But I know he is still there, still calling, still looking for someone to talk to. Marcus Devlin has been missing for 16 years. Whatever is using his voice, claiming to be lost in those woods, it is not him. Not anymore. Maybe it never was. Maybe something else found his voice in those mountains and learned how to use it. And now it calls out every few nights, testing to see who will answer, who will engage, who will give it the attention it needs to become something more than just a voice in the darkness.